Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I'm just going to check and make sure everything is A-OK. Yes, everything looks on the up and up here. Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. Time for how many days have we done shows this year? I don't know. There's subtraction involved. That's higher math, so forget about it. Anyway, as a matter of fact, I am reminded that today is the first live Wednesday show that we've done. We're all the way to the 10th of January. And just now hitting the first live Wednesday show of 2024 because, of course, I don't think I'm ever going to forget this. And maybe I'll never even forget the date, except what was the date? All right, well, 10 minus 7, that's 3. So January 3rd, I guess, the day of the infamous, hey, I don't really need this alarm after all, let's turn it off, slip up. I'll never live it down. Although, I'll never forget how it felt. Although, actually, it felt lousy at the moment when I woke up. But right before then must have been great. I was having a hell of a time. All right. Well, time for another show. And Greg Dworkin already getting his Rafto stories ready for this morning. Must be a busy day on the West Coast. The usual chatter and comments from Justice not there today. So I guess it's a busy day. Who knows? There may be any number of errands. He's a busy guy. And it's like 14 o'clock in the morning. Negative 14 o'clock in the morning, way over there on the other coast. And the fact that he wakes up at all for this is incredible. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe Wednesday. So maybe he's sleeping. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Rest. Take it easy. Take the day off, Justice. All right. Well, okay. Oh, he's been, all right. He's just been sending the Skype messages to the wrong recipient, I guess. He had the wrong panel open. Okay. Just checking, making sure everybody's awake, because it's not a given anymore. All right, what's up this morning? I think everybody's talking about yesterday's hearing before the D.C. Circuit Court. We were talking about it yesterday. People were talking about it live as it was happening because it was so incredible. The things that got, brought forward, the arguments that were made. I guess the takeaway for everybody, presumably, is that one of the judges and we got this on the air yesterday because it was so incredible. Everybody was talking about it, but still, a day later, everybody is writing about that. There was a million articles about it, some analysis about it. The idea that Trump's lawyers' conception of the presidential immunity that they were arguing for, it would enable, as one of the judges says, for the president to order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political rivals, and it would all be A-OK because if it was done while he was president, it would have been within the scope of his duties. I guess the underlying argument, if there really is one, was supposed to be that presumably the president, that it's really a deference thing more so than an immunity. Well, I guess it's a little bit of both. But you might ask, what is it about this assassination that made it so necessary for the security of the United States? Because presumably that's why you did it, right? Oh, yeah, right. National security actually determined this. Not my jealousy of that person or just fit of pique. Okay, so we'll start with the assumption as judges that there was a valid reason for it, and I guess the burden will be on somebody else to show that it was arbitrary and capricious. Is that what you're arguing for? That never really got hashed out, but I guess that's what underlies the whole thing. But yeah, so there was Trump's attorneys having to argue for the idea that the assassination would be just fine unless the president was impeached and convicted for having done that thing, which would then leave them exposed to criminal indictment afterwards. Of course, there are other places and other forums in which Trump and his lawyers have argued that that would be double jeopardy, of course. They're arguing, in fact, that it's double jeopardy that you be tried and acquitted. Although I guess they're stuck with it. Now that really would be double jeopardy if he was tried again later. I mean, it wouldn't be double jeopardy. It would be double jeopardy if he had been tried in a court of law and then convicted and then is tried again in another court of law for the same crime. But anyway, I guess they're stuck with the provision that they were using backwards and inside out that's in the Constitution that says if you are convicted and removed from office, you remain liable for criminal prosecution afterwards. And I guess they figure they can't shake that one off, but they did make interesting use of that one by turning it inside out and saying, well, if you're impeached but not convicted, then you can't be tried in a court of law afterwards. It's only if you are removed that you're able to be, so I don't know. They've been arguing against themselves in the past, but I think what really struck most people was, you're arguing for the ability of the president to order assassinations and basically skate on them. And then as others were pointing out, well, this creates some sort of liability-free zone at the end of a term of office where a president can do something that would ordinarily land him in trouble, whether criminal charges or impeachment or both. But because it's so late in the term and they don't get to impeach him before the term ends and therefore yada yada. But of course, remember, keep in mind, there's no such thing, or at least it's never been established judicially, if that matters for anything anymore, that there's any such thing as being too late for an impeachment. It's never too late to impeach a president. I don't know, might not even be ever too early. In fact, let's impeach the next couple Republican presidents before they even declare for office. And we'll test that. But no such thing definitively. But, that's another hair. We don't have to split that one yet. We do have to let Greg Dworkin in. I mean, the door opened. He came in. I know he's here. That's true. Yeah, according to the comments sections on the various fora
it's just desserts to
I guess so. Right. Okay. So you just, why don't you stay there? Oh, here's an idea. You listen for an hour and then you go at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Good morning,
This
Greg.
whole discussion is cooperative communication.
It is.
Which is to say that if you grew up in New York, if you don't interrupt, it means you're not listening.
Right.
So
Notice
it's very
we keep
rude
doing
not to
it.
interrupt.
Right. We're not offended by it. We keep doing it. It's not, Greg's not, threatening me.
No, I'm not in the least offended by it.
And, he's, well, if you don't let me on
Shut
to
up,
interrupt
I'm
you,
talking to you.
right, I'll walk all the way down in 100-mile-an-hour winds from Connecticut. Is it windy there yet?
It was windy last night. We had lots of flooding.
There's another one
in my garage, but nothing terrible.
Oh, all right.
That 3 sump pumps couldn't handle.
Okay.
We have extra.
Yeah, I guess so. We haven't had rough weather with it really here, but I don't know. There's like 15 storms coming and maybe a polar vortex, if that means anything to anybody.
Yeah,
So.
well, what's going to happen is first we had snow, then we had torrential rain, which melted the snow, and by the end of the week we're supposed to get freezing weather. So
skating.
We'll see how that all goes. Right, so it's basically skating week weather.
Okay.
So the problem for Trump, of course, is without fear or favor, he's in a maze of twisty little passages all alike, and it's really hard to figure out how to get out of the colossal cave because every time he turns, there's another piece of his lawyer testimony which basically contradicts things and says the opposite. You pointed out one of the big problems, of course, and that is that if in fact it requires him to be impeached before he's convicted, then he can wait till the last week and then snuff everybody and then resign.
Yes, well, under one theory, it is interesting. Somebody ought to write something down
theory,
about
and the judge wasn't having
this.
it. So to set this up a little bit.
No judges. There were 3 of them. They were all not having it.
All women, by the way.
Oh.
Kind of interesting having Trump had to sit there and plead
like
in front of women, which I think he hates. But the judges were one named Henderson, who's Republican appointed. I think that's G.W. Bush. She's the one most sympathetic to Trump, but I don't think she was having any of it.
Yeah, she's the one with the eye.
A woman named Childs, a Biden
Julia?
appointee, and a woman named Pan, also a Biden
Florence,
appointee.
I think, actually. But yeah, okay.
And, some really interesting and fascinating stuff went down. Let me give you George Conway's view first.
All right.
Trump's lawyer walked into a trap by the end of the argument. Everyone knew.
Trump's lawyer walks into a bar. Boom.
So Trump's lawyer walks into a bar along with two other lawyers on a dark and stormy night after getting out of the cave with many twisty passages. Mm-hmm. So let's see. This is one of the ones where Ruth Bader Ginsburg's portrait gets to stare down at Trump while he's, in the courtroom.
Cool. He must like that.
And the jurisdictional question arose from the fact that the federal courts strongly disfavor interlocutory appeals.
See,
now we've gone over the word interlocutory before. I, a layman, now knows what it means.
Yes.
It means you get to do that first before you decide everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So it challenges the district court rulings. And remember, the way it works is that there's a district court, the lower court, that's Chutkan, the circuit court, also known as a court of appeals, and that's what this is. And then there's the Supreme Court, which decides things without fear or favor so long as you're a Republican. So the disfavor that the courts look at interlocutory appeals can be overcome on occasion for so-called collateral orders. That is to say, orders deciding issues that are sufficiently divorced from the ultimate merits of the case. And there's a case that came up during the trial called Midland Asphalt Corporation.
Excuse me? Asphalt.
The United States.
Okay, got it.
The Supreme Court made clear the collateral order exception must be narrowly construed, particularly in criminal cases. No court's ever addressed how Midland Asphalt applies to a criminal prosecution of a former president for acts he committed in office. And the answer is, like the Teamsters, you just pave him over. That's what Midland Asphalt's all about, right?
I guess.
So
sounds like it.
The Trump lawyer, Sauer, argued that the exception does apply and the court should hear the appeal. It's not clear everybody agreed on that. So that's like even deciding whether the question has standing. So that's one thing the court has to decide.
That's always there. Right. Are we even supposed? I'm not even supposed to be here.
That's right. I'm not even supposed to decide this, but that's a sideshow.
Okay. Right. Oh, what about, tell us about the murder.
The most incisive and persistent questioner was Pan. She jumps in and says, Florence Pan says, can I explore the implications of what you're arguing? I understand your position to be, this is quote, I understand your position to be that a president is immune from criminal prosecution for any official act, even if that action is taken for unlawful and unconstitutional purpose. Is that correct? And his answer was yes, but with an exception. The exception being if a person's impeached first. If the president's impeached and convicted by the Senate, then and only then can they be prosecuted in a criminal court. And then after he leaves office. Mm-hmm. And that was a great answer, says Conway. Now, as I wrote a couple of days ago about Trump's Supreme Court certiorari.
Certiorari, right? It's like Ferrari, but with a certiorari.
In his Colorado ballot disqualification case.
Yeah.
We just call it cert because we can't pronounce things.
Yeah, that's
appellate
a handy,
courts,
easy
that's
thing.
To say the circuit court, usually doesn't find convincing a litigant's efforts to combine two weak points in order to make a strong one. Usually, the weakness in one bad argument bleeds into the other, and that's what happened here. As Judge Pan's question pointed out, Trump's main argument is presidents can't be prosecuted for their official acts. The argument's based on a line of civil cases, more specifically in Nixon v. Fitzgerald, that there's absolute presidential immunity from damages liability for acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. And George Conway knows a lot about this because he helped ghostwrite the Supreme Court brief for Paula Jones that defeated Clinton's claim of immunity 9-0. Mm-hmm. So, but Trump's immunity is at least an argument, not a good one, not a winner.
He's making an
not
argument.
Completely and totally ridiculous.
Well.
Okay? And then the second argument relies on what's called the Constitution's impeachment judgment clause, Article 1, Section 3. That provision says the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to the law.
Yes.
So the way the Trump team interprets that is you therefore must impeach before you convict. And that's not what it says.
They've had that interpretation plus the one that says if you're impeached and not convicted, then you can't be liable in a court of law afterwards.
Right. And so George
both
Conway
wrong.
says, look, I could go on about this, but was obviously frivolous. Mm-hmm. And by making this argument, the lawyer unwittingly set a nasty trap for himself. A trap that Judge Pan's brilliant interrogation shut tight. The judge wasted no time in drilling into the implications. So, and here's the quote that was making the rounds that you referenced that everybody remembers. Could a president order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? That's an official act. In order to SEAL Team 6. And the lawyer, Sauer, replied unresponsively, a president would quickly be impeached and removed for that. And then, yada, yada, humma, humma, look over there, swirl. Mm-hmm. And Pan said, no, I want an answer. I asked you a yes or no question. Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution? So if he were impeached and convicted first, said Sauer, and Pan said, see, your answer is no. Mm-hmm. And Sauer said, no, my answer is yes. It's a qualified yes.
Okay.
And Pan said, look, I asked you a series of hypotheticals about criminal actions that could be taken by a president and be considered official acts, and I've asked you, would such a president be subject to criminal prosecution? And your answer, your yes or no answer is no. And Sauer, realizing he was being cornered, tried to avoid the door closing behind him, but Pan was having none of it. Like the experienced prosecutor she is, she insisted on an answer and wasn't going to let it go. And by the way, if this judging thing doesn't work out for her, I would suggest her for Meet the Press.
Oh, all right.
George Conway said.
Sure.
Right.
Those
so they went around a little
tenure,
bit, but the damage was done, and Pan's point was devastatingly made. In essence, Sauer was arguing out of both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, Sauer argued the Constitution gave the president absolute immunity, and on the other hand, the U.S. Constitution effectively gives permission by impeaching and convicting, well, so he can be prosecuted, but he's not absolutely immune because he can be prosecuted. So if he has absolute immunity, then how can he be anything but absolutely immune? Right. And yet, if he can be prosecuted after he's impeached, then he's not absolutely immune. And so, therefore, the whole argument falls apart.
Yes, on a number of levels. But yeah, even it's just bad argument even all by itself, right? You know, because as Pan was trying to illustrate for everybody, very few Americans would allow any such leeway for. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say political murder is okay? Well, it could be, or at least temporarily. Well, I don't like any of that answer, actually.
Right. So Lee Kovarsky, who's a Texas lawyer, and many of these are professors and do this for a living. You try to analyze these things. Basically said Trump almost certainly lost 3-0.
I would assume so, yes.
And that's really the bottom line.
Yeah, that's the important part. He'll probably lose 3-0. He may or may not ask for an en banc rehearing, at which point they would say, no, I mean, there's nobody on this court that wants to hear this. Then... Yeah. So whether he does that or just goes direct to the Supreme.
Jack Smith asked them to do it early, and they said, no, it needs to ripen. And if this is how it's going to ripen, there's nothing but rotten fruit for Trump to try to pick.
Yeah. Also extremely easy for the Supreme Court as well to say, it was 3-0. There was no interest in rehearing it. We also should just leave it. I mean, there will be judges who say, no, I want to validate that thing. But I really doubt that they'll get the numbers that they need to actually review something that dumb.
So, the problem here...
There's certainly no splits here for them to settle.
Yeah. But one of the things that the Court of Appeals, the D.C. Circuit, has to do, I think, is give us a roadmap. They can't define definitively because that's up to the Supreme Court for reasons that I'll mention. But they have to tell us, is this an interlocutory appeal that's going to hold up the trial or is it not? What's the timing? And if the Supreme Court looks at that 3-0, this is pretty clear, slam dunk kind of thing, do they say, no, we're not taking the case? Or do they say nothing? And by deciding not to take the case later, do they draw out the interlocutory part of it, making the trial lose its calendar days? I mean, that's the part I can't figure out. I don't know what's going to happen in regard to how little or much this is going to wind up delaying things. Maybe not much. Maybe from March to May. Maybe not at all. It depends upon what the Court of Appeals does.
Right. And of course, I guess they could say, well, listen, on the substantive issue, there's no such thing as absolute immunity. You definitely lost that. On the threshold question of whether or not this interlocutory appeal is timely made, ordinarily we would say, no, this is an appeal you should make upon conviction. However, Bush v. Gore, something, no precedent. We're doing this because you are the president, but we don't think that it should stand as precedent that other defendants should get this sort of question answered on an interlocutory basis, and never again will we do it. But for now, no, is the answer. They could do that, and the Supreme Court could leave that and say, yeah, that sounds good to us. So
now, if they don't take the case, they don't have to deal with the Clarence Thomas should recuse question.
Right. Oh, good
so
point.
There's a lot of stuff riding on this.
Maybe that's the reason. I mean, that could be it, right? All of a sudden, we thought we had the numbers.
Not to inject politics into the Supreme Court, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. Of course, I mean, I imagine he's going to ignore that whole thing anyway, but I'm sure he'd rather ignore the question of whether or not he has to ignore pressure to recuse.
See, he might ignore it here, but he won't ignore it when it comes to keeping Trump off the ballot.
Yeah,
and
maybe.
That's another one. The Colorado thing is sort of percolating out there, too.
Interesting, too. I wonder what sort of signals Trump would send, if he could send any, that would be understood or that Thomas could understand them. You know, do I want you to, am I more afraid? Do I want to get rid of these criminal charges?
Well, Alina Habba has been sending messages.
Yeah. Well, sort of, I guess so.
We stood a lot by Brett Kavanaugh, and so we expect he's going to do the right thing, because, why wouldn't he?
Yeah, so, okay, you're right. The signals have been sent, and I imagine, on the question of what does Trump prioritize, the answer is everything. Give me everything. I want you to do everything I want always. So I don't know whether he can really prioritize. But he'll be worried about the criminal convictions. But on the other hand, I suppose he's also thinking, if I can run for president, I'll definitely win, because I'll cheat or just ignore the results of the election and declare myself president and then pardon myself. And that takes care of it. So it's the ballot one that I'm most worried about.
So Trump actually showed up for this particular hearing. He didn't have to, but he did. Yeah. And the reason he did is so he could turn around and say, I couldn't be on the campaign trail in Iowa, where it's going to be really cold, because I was in D.C. and I had to be there.
Yeah, didn't have to I don't know how that's a winning thing. I mean, I guess it's the martyr thing for the troops or whatever. But
no, he's really into the martyr thing, and I'll give you another example.
The rest
of
the country
yet another different trial for Trump. I don't know if you know this.
No, what? Where? When?
Well, this is the New York one, where he's got to talk to the judge. I think the final summaries is soon. And he threatened to actually give his own summation.
Oh, well, that's
I forget the legal term for when you want to go and talk.
Closing arguments?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pro se or whatever.
You want to speak on your own behalf. Right. Pro se, that's it.
Yeah, see? I'm learning stuff.
Yeah.
So, he's threatening to do that. And people are commenting on that, and I think that's really silly. What he wants is not to speak, because if he does, he'll look like an idiot. What he wants is for the judge to say, no, you can't, so that then he can say, see, it's not a fair trial. It wouldn't even let me speak.
Well,
that's why he made that offer.
I guess so. I wasn't clear on which case this was in. This is in New York?
This is the New York fraud case, as opposed to the E. Jean Carroll rape case.
Right, that's the other New York one.
Which is going forward, which is different than the D.C. immunity case,
right?
Which is quite different than the Mar-a-Lago stolen documents case.
But are being worked on together by the same guy.
Yeah,
Jack
so,
Smith.
All of that
different
is penetrating the public in the sense of, gee, Trump's in court a lot.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's all you need to know, really.
The theory of, well, I'll go off the campaign trail and show myself to be a martyr, but the rest of the country is like, you are in court a lot in a lot of places. You're in trouble.
We're going to talk about New Hampshire and Iowa after the break.
All right.
And it's really interesting to watch that play out and how it plays out differently in Iowa and New Hampshire and why. And we'll talk about that.
All right.
And I think it's interesting.
Sure. Why not? We can do that. Oh, we got it. What are we going to do until then? Because we still have 2 minutes.
Let me just give you some polls to set it up for you.
Okay, yes.
Numbers.
Right. 4.
2 New Hampshire polls. 2 New Hampshire polls came out. CNN
2
had Trump at 39 and Haley at 32. She's hot. She's gaining.
Hey.
Except for the USA Today Boston Globe Suffolk poll, which has Trump at 46 and Haley at 26.
Still, that's a giant number. Remember when she was 2, 3, 5?
And Haley was dropping in the USA Today Boston Globe Suffolk poll. Now, interestingly, both of them have DeSantis way back, especially in New Hampshire. So he's in big trouble.
Okay.
And by the way, there's another piece of information which is not exactly politics, but sort of politics.
Okay.
From the Des Moines Register.
Yeah.
The temperature is going to be a high temperature of 1 and a low temperature of -9.
So, on the one hand, you could say cozy and warm inside the caucus hall. On the
other hand, you got to get there.
Right.
That is the coldest caucus, in recorded recent memory.
Wow. Okay. And that is
cold doesn't necessarily stop Iowans from caucusing, mind you. But if you look at the polls, the polls say that even though Trump has a commanding lead, the most committed of the delegates by poll are DeSantis. His delegates are most committed to actually showing up and voting.
Okay. Well, they're the ones most likely to believe that there will be a toasty warm hyperloop bringing them to the caucus, thanks to Elon Musk.
If that happens, Trump wins, and DeSantis finishes second with 14.
Hey.
And beats Haley, who has 13. DeSantis will declare it a win. Everybody else will laugh. That doesn't help Haley in New Hampshire.
No.
And it's going to be cold there, but not quite as cold. So we'll talk about that after the break.
Cool cold. So I think that's pretty good. That's a good outcome for DeSantis if he can get it, because Haley all of a sudden clobbering him. I remember
Haley
when
beats
she was
DeSantis in Iowa, he's finished.
Yeah, good.
And if she doesn't, and he finishes second at 14%, he's finished.
Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were talking our way into the break, out of the break. Everything's still people still talking about the court case.
Still broken.
But
so,
I like those
have
polling
a CBS
numbers.
poll, speaking of the immunity question here, which I
that.
thought was interesting. We talked about this poll the other day. This is the one that said that, even MAGA people are not so keen on January 6th and how that went down.
Yes.
But CBS News poll for YouGov also asked, and this was on January 3 through 5, so relatively recent, margin of error 2.8 points.
I didn't answer. I was asleep for the first day of that poll.
Yeah. Should Trump have immunity for actions taken while president?
Poll letting the voters decide. All right.
Yes, he should. 36. No, he should not. 64.
All right.
So that's basically 2-1.
Yeah, and that's better than he's going to do on the court.
Now, percent favoring Trump immunity for actions taken while president by party, And look at the indies. They're the ones that count. 14% of Democrats say, yeah, he should get immunity. 32% of independents and 69% of Republicans.
It's almost like there are very few Republicans left in the country.
But 31% of Republicans don't say that.
Yeah.
That's where it gets to be interesting with Nikki Haley.
Ah.
Okay. So you noticed that in New Hampshire, Haley appears to be doing a little bit better than she's doing in Iowa. And yet, in the end, we think it won't matter. And Jonathan Martin, who's moved over back to Politico, where he came from the New York Times, has an actually interesting column about that over the weekend. Today's GOP is split along class lines, and why Haley won't break through is the title. It's because her college grad supporters aren't the majority.
Okay.
There aren't enough college grad supporters in Iowa to help her because they all leave the state as soon as they get their diplomas, because who wants to stay?
Yeah, except for the doctors,
it's minus 2 degrees. In New Hampshire, he was making the observation that he's going around to these Haley events. Half the audience is reporters. The other half are all college grads. He couldn't find any non-college grads, any at all, at any of these performances, these public appearances.
I thought you were going to say that half of them were legislators.
Well, they're all legislators.
Right. So, yeah, that's interesting. That's a big difference. That'll be a big difference between Iowa and New Hampshire, I guess, right? I mean, the region is full of colleges.
The most memorable feature of Haley's otherwise forgettable gathering was not what she said, but the nature of the audience, and how it explains why Trump is poised to win overwhelmingly in Iowa on Monday, and he'll face the same general election challenges in 2024 that he did in 2020. I struggled to find a single attendee in the suburban strip mall tavern who was not a college graduate. Similarly, the day before, I couldn't find a Haley admirer who showed up to see her in Sioux City who was not also a college graduate.
Okay. That's interesting. Bernie Sanders should run as a Republican.
People had no use for Trump, and that's all fine, except that, if they're not the majority, that doesn't really help all that much. So I found an interesting comment from Ali Vitali, the reporter from MSNBC, at a similar event. She says, and Jonathan Martin's story puts this comment that I'm about to give you in context, because context is cool.
Oh, all right.
I've now spoken to 3 folks at this Haley event, most decidedly supporting her, who voted for Trump both times but are now looking for new leadership. I asked what their turning point was for all of them. It was election denialism in January 6th. So you look at that and say, that January 6th stuff really does have some penetrating power into the Republican Party, because you look and they're saying the reason I don't want Trump is January 6th. And gee, that has resonance. And then Jonathan Martin says, yeah, if you went to college.
Yeah, well, that's where they teach you to think about things like that, as opposed to.
But if you didn't go to college, you don't care about those things. You're an evangelical, and the definition of evangelical is I'm for Trump. Doesn't mean going to church.
I mean, I guess
it's changed. The whole, nature of evangelicalism.
Yeah. I never really associated it necessarily with college education.
If Trump is your Lord, you're an evangelical. You're a Republican evangelical.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's true too. You can be evangelical without being strictly Christian.
You don't go to church.
Instead, worshiping Trump.
Go to church. They don't care.
Yeah, well, they never learned that they had to. That they teach you that in college.
So
they used
that's
to,
Iowa.
Anyway.
That's rural Iowa. That's Steve King country.
Huh.
And they're not the people where you speak to where you can find 3 of them. In fact, you have a whole bunch of reporter stories saying, and this is buried in the Jonathan Martin one, a Nikki Haley supporter says, there's a lot going on here, and I can't vote for Trump again. That's why I'm looking at Haley. And Martin asked something along the lines of, how widespread is that? And this guy just shakes his head and says, look, around here, this is what people think. You go out to the rural areas, that's a different story altogether. I mean, even the Iowans know that.
Yeah, and when they really mean rural.
So the party is basically, 66% Trump, rural, evangelical in the new sense, you know, and 33% college. But if you lose that 33% in a general election, that's what Jonathan Martin's talking about.
Yeah.
In regard to Trump's got no problem winning the primary, but he's got issues in the general election.
Yeah.
You know, and this has nothing to do with Biden and Democrats. Some of these folks will stay home. They won't vote for Democrats. Some of them will. Some of them will not vote for Trump.
I guess so. I mean, if you went to enough college, you may also say, actually, I mean, I'm going to vote for Haley because Trump is disgusting and this is a Republican primary, but Haley is really no great shakes. And I know that because I went to college, and she's saying, well, I'm not Trump, but when I'm worried about winning the vote among Republicans, I'm pretty Trumpy. So how's that?
Trump wins Iowa next Monday, next freezing Monday.
Yeah.
And then we get to see who's in second and by what amount. Mm-hmm. And then we move on to New Hampshire a couple of weeks later. And, you know, either Haley doesn't have momentum or she does. But even if she does, it's not going to be enough. And then she hits South Carolina, which is going to be a wall. Lots of rural voters there, too. And they think more like Iowa than they do New Hampshire. So that's why Jonathan Martin, and I agree with him on this one, really, Haley has no chance at all. But you got to talk about something because it's boring talking about Trump all the time.
Yeah.
So Nikki Haley became the thing. And then when she got exposed to a little bit more scrutiny, she did her Civil War thing.
Right.
And who does that hurt her with? College voters.
Oh.
Her voters. That's why her support is soft.
And I guess if you sit and think,
because non-college voters agreed with it, but that's not the point. They're not her voters anyway.
Like where do college voters who sought refuge in Haley and then get disappointed on the Civil War go? There's nobody.
Home.
Yeah, right. This is it. I'm going to stay home for the primary and think about voting for a Democrat in the general. Maybe stay home there too. But yeah, there's nobody out there for them to. It can't be DeSantis. He's as dumb as any of them. And then who's left?
That's why I think this whole mix of Haley who's supporting her and stuff like that is just so darn interesting. Christie has no chance.
He's going to surge to 4.
Maybe.
Well,
the funny thing is that I think he was getting poised to endorse Haley, but then after that Civil War thing, I don't think he can now.
No, that won't help him get that done. And so I mean, he can bow out just the same. But
so therefore, the non-Trump support won't coalesce about any one person, and it wouldn't matter if they did because Trump is over 50% anyway. So it's going to be Trump. So that's the deal. On the other hand, Jonathan B. Last, writing in the Bulwark, says, that may be true, but this might be the high water mark of Trumpism, an argument for why Trump's numbers can't get much better and Biden's numbers are likely to improve.
Okay.
And he relies on, I hate to say it, an observation by Mark Halperin, but I'll just say that's a starting point, so you don't have to rely on what Halperin thinks. He thinks it's good for
He observed it, that's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Halperin says Biden's 3 big problems are, number 1, he's playing from behind as an incumbent, which sets a media narrative against him. I think that's true. I think that's actually insightful.
Okay.
Now, SIGHT, not CITE. The reason it's true is because the reporters, and especially their editors, I don't know how to say this politely, aren't always that bright.
They went to college,
They will tell you. Yeah, a lot of them went to Harvard.
Yeah.
That's why Harvard's in the news all the time. You can't get it out of the news. But they understand that there's a lot of issues with polling right now. And yet the polls say that Trump is tighter ahead. Therefore, he is playing from behind as an incumbent. Biden is. Therefore, that sets a media narrative against him.
I guess so.
Number 1, should that happen? No. Number 2, is it even true? No, not necessarily. Number 3, then why does it happen? Because.
Yeah.
It's that number 3 part that I'm referring to in terms of their overall perspacity. They really know what's going on. I don't know that they do. They fall into this everybody says the same thing, therefore it must be true trap. And I don't think they have it right.
Okay.
Now, that's the media part. That's number 1.
Right.
Number 2.
Oh, yes.
There were 3, remember. Republicans have quickly and decisively rallied to Trump. They have, but not the college-educated part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3, parts of the Obama coalition have not yet rallied to Biden. Black, Hispanic, young voters.
Okay.
Also true.
Sure.
And Jonathan B. Last says, I slightly disagree with Halpern on number 1 because it's true that the media narrative is against him, but my own view, Jonathan Last's view, is that journalists tend to overdetermine the influence of the media in electoral politics. And that's true. You know, it is true that the media has a bias against Biden because he's boring.
Okay.
And he doesn't have enough press conferences, and he doesn't give them access, and he doesn't let them make a name for themselves, which is what they really care about. That's all true, and it doesn't matter nearly as much as media thinks it matters. I think that Jonathan B. Last is quite right about that.
Okay.
But,
well, it should matter to them most. It's them.
It matters to them most, but it doesn't matter to the public.
Yeah, right.
But however much weight you want to give this factor, Halpern is directionally correct. Biden is trailing. The media slant is always something like, unemployment is 3.9%. Here's why that's bad for Biden.
There's
the
a
only
9
way it's
in
going
it.
to flip is if Biden moves ahead in the polls. So it's stupid. It's not correct, but you have to accept that it's the way it is. So move ahead in the polls and it goes away. As for 2 and 3, those are vectors along which Biden can reasonably hope to improve, and Trump probably can't. Trump's not going to improve his numbers. And Biden will probably get people to consolidate. We heard Charlemagne the God say basically Biden's a terrible politician. You know, I don't like him. But look, Trump is the alternative, and Trump is awful, and Trump is unacceptable. So, like, what are you going to do?
I mean, the guy made it to the presidency. Granted, Charlemagne made it to being God, I guess, but still.
But, you know, the point is,
some credit for
this is what happens when you really, really, really don't want those two to be the ones running against each other, and yet they are, and you have to come to terms with that, and they're starting to come to terms with that. And that's why Biden's numbers are going to improve.
Okay. I mean, that seems like it's likely to happen, and for that reason?
Yeah.
I know. That'll be to great frustration for others who, you know, only wanted there to be better choices, and no one can fault you for that, except, yeah, I mean, you may have been
right, and also it's going to be very
disappointing
to those who still believe in the Green Lantern theory of the presidency, which is to say, if you only will it harder enough, you could happen. And why hasn't Biden made peace in the Middle East?
No, yeah, well, that seems harder to do these days. But yes, well, I mean, I guess I don't know. Maybe the college people will hold it up and say they didn't really make peace in the Middle East last time either. They, you know, took people who weren't at war and had them declare that they weren't. That's not the same thing.
Yeah, as the old joke goes, you're better off trying to build a bridge to Hawaii.
Yeah. Oh, right. A cattle bridge. I now understand that to be a necessity. Another subject of discussion late at night. Mark Zuckerberg apparently raising specialty cattle. Feeding them entirely on macadamia nuts. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, I mean,
I thought
because
he was
that's normal.
Them on journalists.
That'd be a better idea. But he feeds them misinformation instead, which he has plenty of. I don't know. It was a weird thing that made an appearance. I don't know exactly where he got the idea that raising cattle in the middle of the ocean was a great idea either. But, you know, I guess if you're a billionaire, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah,
he's very proud
out of context,
himself.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah,
the best
that never hurts in generating interest.
So this is a corollary
Totally
adjacent piece, which I thought was interesting, from Mark Jacob, who used to be the Chicago Sun-Times editor.
Oh, yes, right.
Now retired, but writes a column for himself.
For his own enjoyment. And ours.
Called Stop the Presses. And on this Stop the Presses article, dated January 8th, he says, media played dumb and amplified January 6th lies. When journalists sidestep the truth, MAGA disinformation wins. And he's talking about Biden's speech and Trump's counter speech.
Okay.
On Thursday, he says the Associated Press wrote this both sides headline: one attack, two interpretations. Biden and Trump both make the January 6th riot political rallying cry.
Yes, I remember that. On
Sunday, USA Today chimed in with this outrageous lead for Donald Trump. January 6, 2021 was a beautiful day for Joe Biden. It was the day we nearly lost America. And then USA Today proceeded with a story that acted as if it didn't know which view was more valid. In between those two examples of performative ignorance, the New York Times weighed in with its own dueling reality spin. Their headline was, clashing over January 6, Trump and Biden show reality is at stake in 2024. In dueling sets of speeches, Donald Trump and President Biden are framing the election as a battle for the future of democracy, with Mr. Trump brazenly casting Mr. Biden as the true menace.
Yeah,
now,
all right.
These outlets know who's telling the truth and who's lying, and the Times got so much blowback on that, they changed their headline online to Trump signals an election year full of falsehoods on January 6th in democracy. That's a better headline. Should have started with that.
Yeah, although theirs wasn't as bad, I thought, as USA Today. It was awful.
But okay. They corrected it.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it wasn't great.
And then the topper came Sunday morning when Kristen Welker interviewed MAGA Representative Elise Stefanik on NBC's Meet the Press and allowed her to refer to people jailed for January 6 crimes as hostages, and Welker never pushed back on that term. Major media are deeply afraid of positioning themselves as the opposition to fascist Republicans, so they keep providing a platform for them to lie to the public. And this comes at a terrible time as we head into election year, which right-wing disinformation is likely to get worse. Now, this kind of cumulative dishonesty is powerful, made more so by MAGA's tremendous stamina. The Washington Post ran a smart story last week about Gateway Pundit, which is a favorite news outlet for Trump because it's the entry point for many hoaxes.
Right.
And, you know, it's like, who's that? That guy, Matt Drudge. Remember him? When's the last time you even thought about the Drudge Report?
Yeah, not much, except as like breeding grounds for others.
It was the thing that Gateway Pundit has now become.
Yes.
And why? And why do media keep referring to it? Because they do. Should they? No.
Like the Drudge Report, and I mean, it was horrific, but it was actually, by comparison to Gateway Pundit, a considerably more solid source.
Right. So Mark Jacob points out the Republican superpower is an absolute lack of shame. They ignore fact checks just as they ignore facts, and nothing gets effectively debunked.
Right.
And add this to the fact that disinformation is increasingly welcome in social media.
Yes.
See Elon Musk.
Right.
So
and Mark Zuckerberg.
He's worried that it's going to get worse, that media will go soft in the later stages. Well, you know, Trump won, so we have to treat him as a serious candidate equal to the, you know.
Yeah. I'm sure they'll do that.
That's where the courts come in. So they can always do that. Brian Beutler points out you can't afford weak-kneed liberalism in the Trump era. Sincere objections to disqualifying Trump from the ballot, for example, are reasoned backward from misplaced fear.
Yes.
We can't do that. Think of the consequences. Well, think of the consequences of not doing it.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
You can't approach this with fear and favor. He says.
Why not? Just because the saying goes the other way? You know, I wonder why it goes
fear
that
and
way.
Favor, that's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. How come they always land on that?
Well, what if the Republicans tit for tat? Well, they're already tit for tat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, believe me. They're way ahead of us on that one.
And so, his main point, liberals need to be uncompromising in this moment, not because such fastidiousness is always right, because it's necessary in the face of corrosive threats to jettison facts and turn all of politics and law into a contest of will to abuse power. I think you should do it when it's right, and it's right most of the time, and that's good enough. If we have faith that you shouldn't make stuff up, you shouldn't be Gateway Pundit, you shouldn't insist on doing things that are stupid just because it's your side. But you know what? If you just do the right thing, like 98% of the time, you'll be fine. Don't worry about the 2% where you have to say, well, I can't go along with this one.
Or where doing the right thing costs you in the end. That does happen from time to time. But I don't know. I suppose you're supposed to take comfort in the fact that it's the right thing, and it'll maybe pay off later when the other guys do the wrong thing and you're able to point to the right one.
Right.
And say,
now, here's a Brookings piece that I'm going to do just to finish out the segment here.
All right.
It's also a little bit about media. I always find media interesting. And this is on the economy.
That's another thing we use a lot.
Why are Americans so displeased with the economy? And there's, of course, a number of different reasons. The price of eggs and the price of gas.
Tea in China.
It's the buying power of your household, not so much whether or not inflation is up or down or unemployment is up or down.
Mm-hmm.
But they say there's also non-economic concerns.
Right.
Greg Ip, the Wall Street Journal columnist, calls it referred pain, non-economic sources of dissatisfaction, like the Middle East and Ukraine, bleeding into like everything else. And you could see that in, let's say, polling from Michigan for Biden.
Okay.
unhappy about things in the Middle East, let's take it out on the president, that sort of thing. Yes. But a third set of explanations, says Brookings, relates to economic perception and the influence of negatively biased news sources. One aspect of the theory has to do with political polarization, which could lead to both direct dissatisfaction over biased perception of the state of the economy. Republicans are relatively more sour on the economy under a Democratic president than Democrats are under a Republican president. In the analysis below, we offer a complementary explanation related to perception. The tenor of economic news has become systemically more negative over time. It's almost impossible to find good economic news. Nobody talks about it. Inflation goes up 0.1. You'll hear about it for a week and a half.
Sure. Yes.
The employment rate, unemployment rate goes down, employment rate goes up, real spending goes up, wages are growing faster than inflation. That's a 5-minute report on Jobs Friday, and then you don't hear about it for another month.
That's true, because everybody has to hear about people raising cattle in the ocean.
Right. So to test this hypothesis, we model the relationship between the sentiment of economic news stories and fundamental economic measurements. And this is appealing on three fronts. First, a systematic negative bias helps to explain a negative gap between sentiment and macroeconomic indicators.
That's people thinking the economy is bad when it's actually not.
Right. Similarly, a Financial Times survey found large shares of Americans getting basic facts about the economy wrong, including, for example, 90% incorrectly saying prices have risen faster than wages.
All right. Incorrect perceptions. Right.
Third, Americans' assessments of their local community's economic circumstances are far more positive than their assessments of the national economy.
Okay, right. So local situation good, everyone else sucks.
So all of these mischaracterizations and deviations may be partly attributed to a growing negativity in the tone of the economic news. And below, we just document that that's in fact what's going on.
All right.
Now that doesn't prove, a correlation causation thing, but it's a good theory, and I like the idea.
Sure.
Why are people so negative? Well, because Republicans will never say anything good about Democrats. And reporters trying to be fair will never say anything good about Democrats.
Yeah, right. In order to be fair, we'll carry the message that the Republicans
Because if
want.
we said something good about Democrats, it would be good for Democrats, and that would be taking sides, and we can't do that, so we won't.
Right. And I guess if your side, if you're a Republican, is all about being negative.
But what about the other side? Yeah, doesn't that work both ways?
No.
So they will never say anything good about Republicans? Well, yeah, but there's never anything good to say about Republicans.
Well, right. Well, there is that. Plus,
what are you saying here?
I guess interesting. If Republicans are about negativity, then we'll carry the Republican message without being guilty of carrying a positive message about Republicans.
Without fear or favor.
We don't fear being pro-Republican because it's negative.
In a maze of twisty passages that look all alike.
Okay. Well, it helps explain things, but it just makes us disappointed in America.
Yeah, well, that's why Mark Jacob is so pessimistic about how the media will handle this.
Yeah, okay. I can see why that's
We had another example over the weekend.
We did. What?
Yeah, Secretary of Defense Austin was in the hospital and has prostate cancer and basically didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
That's not good. That's sloppy. That's not the way it's supposed to work. There's a whole bunch of reasons that's not good.
I feel like there was a phone message there
is
somewhere.
that the reporters covering the Pentagon especially, but the news in general, take personal exception and umbrage at this. Mm-hmm. They were lied to personally. They hate that, and they just would not let this story go. It's an important story, but not the important story given the Trump trials and what's going on in the Middle East and Ukraine and all this other stuff and the shutdown in Congress, which I can't even talk about because Republicans are so irrational. I have no idea what they're going to do.
Yeah, you don't know.
But no, we have to talk about Secretary Austin. We have to make that the story because he insulted us. He lied to us.
Mm-hmm.
What about Trump lying to you on a daily basis? Yeah, well, it's
or
boring.
Killing
That's
you.
My point is that you watch them and you say, why are you giving the amount of coverage to this relative to the end of democracy, Trump, threatening to, via his lawyers, declare that, he could kill anybody as president and you can't do anything about it?
Is that a big deal? I don't know.
Why do you think that Austin not telling you a personal medical issue is so much more important than all these other things that you have to cover that first?
I don't know.
Well, because he lied to me personally. Well, fine. It's about you.
Oh. Yeah, maybe it's, I feel bad because I didn't give this much attention to the time that they lied about why Melania was in the hospital, so I have to overcompensate.
Well, what about the time Trump was in the hospital?
Yeah, right.
He was in the hospital at one point. He went down to Walter Reed for unknown reasons, and they didn't report on it for a couple of days, and nobody would say why. Do you remember that story?
Only barely, because there was only a few days discussion about it. That is weird. So I guess it's the people who say... or maybe it's, well, you lied to me. Yes, but...
I get it. You shouldn't lie to them. I understand why they're upset.
The other guys don't lie when they say they want to murder me, so that's not a lie. So they're honest, but they lied to you about the hospital. Yeah, but the point is I didn't want to make them mad, and I don't really care if I make the Democrats mad, because they won't threaten to murder me. Oh, well, that's an explanation. No one... posits that one for some reason, but okay.
I'll give you a random tweet which came from Craig Kaplan, C-SPAN Capitol Hill producer, to give you an idea of why I'm not talking about Congress. You can if you want to, because I don't understand anything about what's going on these days. Representative Warren Davidson, Republican of Ohio, voted for Jim Jordan for House Speaker.
Sure, why not?
And then he supported Mike Johnson in the final round.
Right.
Today, he walked out of the House GOP conference meeting in frustration about the top-line spending deal that Mike Johnson made. Before we could even get together, he announced the terms of the surrender. Asked if Speaker Johnson should be fired, Davidson says he should never have been hired in the first place.
By me.
So, what's going on with I have no idea what the Republicans are going to do. They can't
Neither do they.
manage their so-called majority, and I have no idea what they're going to do.
Right. They don't. They put themselves in an untenable situation. But we tried to get to the bottom of this with Joan yesterday, and the best we could come up with was we are in the news in a terrible, terrible way by not being able to elect a speaker. Here's a guy. What do you think? We don't know what he's going to do. I know. All right, fine. Well, what if we make him speaker and he ends up doing the same exact thing that McCarthy did? I don't know. Then I guess we'll get rid of him too.
That guy's talking to Democrats. How can we trust him?
Right. Well, nobody said when they elected him, well, we're electing Mike Johnson because he won't. Or they just said, well, if he does, we'll kick him out too. Okay, but are we kicking him out yet? Not today. All right, then. Story over. He's the speaker. And now here we are. Okay. We'll give it another shot tomorrow. What do you say?
Well, yeah.
Okay. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Did you hear the little boop? Greg and I extended our conversation a full minute beyond the show, but I'll tell you, we didn't settle anything new. You haven't missed out on anything. It was just us remarking on how crazy things are. I was filling him in a little bit on how we discussed this a little with Joan yesterday, that, there's no answer. There's no, the best explanation we could come up with was the Republicans had reached the breaking point with respect to their embarrassment and an inability to elect a new speaker. It didn't matter that it was internally contradictory, that they weren't going to be able to elect a speaker who was going to be able to unite them in an upcoming budget fight and also avoid a government shutdown, which would be a political embarrassment for them that might cost them marginally. And remember, the margins are really slim here. So if it costs you 3-4 seats at the most, even if you also flip some blue seats to red, manage to do that, even so, if you lose anything, the margins are so close that you could either actually literally lose control of the House or effectively lose control of the House, which I guess you can't effectively lose control if you've never effectively had control, but you don't succeed in regaining control, certainly. But, there's no way to keep the government functioning when at this point, any two Republicans, if they are unhappy or genuinely or otherwise, or just want to be in the news as the person who blew something up. So now everybody, I mean, it's a dumb reason to have to interview somebody, but they're going to interview you. So you go and do it, even if what you're holding out for is stupid and counterproductive. It doesn't really matter. You'll still get in the news. So will someone do it? Yeah, sure. Their conference is full of people who will do that. So it doesn't matter who you replace Kevin McCarthy with. The next speaker will definitely have this problem, that there's no way to keep the government running, which they all agree. Well, not all of them, but the largest percentage, I think, of Republicans agree. We want it to keep running. We want to be able to say that we governed and we did the thing. There is always a significant number of Republicans among their conference who say, no, the actual winning message is for government not to function. We're anti-government, and my voters in my district don't care if they actually prefer the government to shut down because they hate the government, or they think it's unnecessary and everyone will learn to live without it and then we won't have to fund it anymore, or something like that. But for the most part, Republicans do say, I think they're looking to us to make sure that the government functions, just at a lower level of spending. That's not possible, but that's what they want to have happen. But then, just like a significant portion of Republicans don't want Donald Trump to win the nomination, but they can't settle on the person that they want to have in his place. And even if they do, they're still not a majority of the Republican Party. But from a practical standpoint, they can't win the general election. So don't you think that more Republicans should come around to the more practical view that the contest isn't determined in the primary, it's determined in the general election, and they should vote for somebody more electable? It's interesting that we haven't heard that term actually this year in this election cycle for Republicans, and it's probably because they are likely to nominate somebody who was a former president, and so the electability question isn't coming up. Because, well, of course he's electable. He was once the president of the United States. He was elected. Well, he wasn't elected. He lost the popular vote by a tremendous margin and won only because of that weird undemocratic thing that we have in the Constitution, mysteriously. And yet, right, I mean, clearly the problem for him is, in fact, his electability. And the evidence for that is tremendous. Not only did he lose the popular vote in 2016, but okay, there was this anomaly, but he got walloped by twice the margin in 2020 and lost the Electoral College to boot, and then tried to fake the Electoral College certificates and declare himself the winner anyway, which should mean not only is he unelectable, but he's untrustworthy and dangerous, and yet here we are. It's just interesting that the electability question isn't mentioned in those terms. And we're used to those terms. And that's the sort of thing that makes people, as dumb as it is, it's always been a terrible argument. I can't believe I'm arguing for bringing it back. But I guess with respect to Donald Trump, it might be worth doing. And it's also an opportunity to talk about him as being a loser, which I do think is a great thing. But it's just interesting how that has disappeared, even though it's an underlying theme for reporters covering looking ahead to the general. It's generally assumed that he's going to be in considerable trouble. But yet, I guess because they have these national polls that, once again, too early. That obviously a point we've driven home a number of times. But also another point we've made in previous years. A national poll doesn't mean very much in a race that's determined by state outcomes. So, that's pretty odd too. But I guess the fact that they're able to point to national polls that shouldn't be regarded as meaning anything, but yet nonetheless provide top-line numbers that show Trump not getting walloped, well, then I guess they're reacting to that and describing it and discarding the electability argument. So I don't know. That seems pretty bizarre to me, but maybe that's something that people could be harping on. Well, who knows? Maybe in the near future, or maybe that's something. maybe that was always something that people argued about in primary season. And given that, look, you can argue about electability all you want. This guy is definitely going to win the primaries. He's way, way, way ahead of anybody else. I don't know. They just didn't bring it up. It's electability is something that you can use to turn the tables when the margins are close and there's no clear front runner, and you can try and make the argument that you should be because you're more electable than the other person. But that just looks ridiculous in the face of losing by 40 points at the moment. You're not electable. Well, okay. I don't know. Just some random thoughts to keep in mind as we forge ahead in the election season. All right, let's see what else there is in pocket that I can share with you. I should make a note to my son here and say, hey, research me that thing about Mark Zuckerberg. I think I could probably find that pretty quickly, but not real news and not real important, but a theme nonetheless. And I mentioned it, and so I should prove to you that it's real, because it's real easy to believe that that's not real. But Mark Zuckerberg is raising cattle not in the middle of the ocean per se, but on an island in the middle of the ocean, a ranch that he owns in Hawaii. And I guess, I don't really know enough about the way Hawaii is laid out to know whether or not a cattle ranch in the Hawaiian Islands is an anomaly or no, there's plenty of them. Where do you think we get our beef? Well, I thought we probably were flying or shipping the vast majority of it to you, but maybe you're raising it yourself. And apparently, I also don't know anything about the viability of feeding cattle on a diet of macadamia nuts and beer. But apparently that's what he's doing there. And apparently he's under the impression that that's going to make the world's most delicious beef. I don't know how much it costs. I don't know who's going to be able to buy this beef raised on a Hawaiian island, fed on macadamia nuts and beer that's locally produced on this ranch. It sounds like the kind of beef that you and I will never experience, but that people who are billionaires and can do stuff like first individually, if I buy a steak from this source, it's a $400 steak, but I don't care because I'm a billionaire. But for Mark Zuckerberg, it's a $4 million steak because he's actually paying for all the macadamia nuts and beer that went into it as well. But it's so delicious, I don't even care. I don't know. Or I have so much money, I don't even care. Probably indicative of a larger societal problem. And so therefore it bears mentioning. Anyway, people are dunking or attempting to dunk on the guy who has enough money to raise his own cattle on macadamia nuts and beer on an island in the middle of the ocean. I don't know how effective a dunk it is, but the dunk is supposed to be, look at this guy. He has no idea what it's like to be a real person in the world. But no, he doesn't. And it's because he's sitting on a pile of money that is inexhaustible. And, I don't know if that's such a great dunk. But anyway, there you have it. That's how that got to be top of mind for me today. All right, let's see. There's a couple of other stories that might actually be more important. Speaking as we were about Mike Johnson and trying to unravel what was going on, there's no unraveling it, but all we can do is observe it from all sides, except I don't want to observe it from the other side because it's gross and weird, and also not very helpful or predictive because it's every man for himself on the other side. But here we have a look at it from Ben Metzner's point of view at the New Republic. He's got an article that, actually it came to my attention via, I think, some social media discussion of it. Am I going to be able to dig up that? Here's how it came to my attention. Arch Pundit, everybody's pal, Arch Pundit, got this one to my attention by pointing out that one Jacob T. Levy, who's Jacob? Tomlinson Professor of Political Theory and Chair of Political Science. Where? McGill University? Okay, is that right? Okay. So now we got some idea of where he's working. But more important than all of the credentials was the fact that he's pointing to this New Republic article And the comment here is Leeeeeroy Jenkins. And everybody enjoys that reference. And that's what I guess caught Arch Pundit's eye, and he forwarded it on to me. What's going on in the article? What's the Leeeeeroy Jenkins situation here? And, he also holds it up alongside one of his own earlier tweets. Jacob Levy does another Leeeeeroy Jenkins reference to the New York Times headline, Far Right Balks as Congress Begins Push to Enact Spending Deal. Essentially, I guess, that a reference to the every man for himself notion that I put less pointedly than Professor Levy did here in pointing at the Leeeeroy Jenkins aspect of things. So what's the full report here? Ben Metzner says, it never ends with the Freedom Caucus. Mike Johnson ouster countdown begins. Yes, Republicans are privately and publicly considering dumping their own House Speaker again over the spending deal. That would definitely be I think it's unprecedented. Vacating the chair successfully or vacating the speakership is unprecedented, I believe. Certainly vacating it twice inside of a single Congress is unprecedented. And let's go see what's up here. Less than 3 months into Mike Johnson's tenure. I think I said, I was just spitballing it out of nowhere. 6 months yesterday. And Jones said, no, it's far less than 6 months. In fact, it's about half that. Less than 3 months into Mike Johnson's tenure as Speaker of the House. Some House Republicans are already experiencing buyer's remorse. They didn't pay any money, of course. But anyway, Texas Representative and Freedom Caucus member Chip Roy on Monday publicly raised the possibility of dumping Johnson as Speaker. Of course, Chip Roy probably, somewhere in the back of his mind, harbors the belief that he'll be a viable candidate for speakership. That may or may not be coloring what he was doing here. Questioned by CNN's Caitlin Collins, Roy mentioned colleagues that are really frustrated with Johnson and alluded to real conversations this week about what House Republicans need to do going forward, calling the situation not good. That's interesting. Now, that's a quote, not good, except that the not is in brackets, so it was something else good, but implying not good. So I'm a little bit at a loss. Not very good. Effing terrifically not good. I don't know what would fit in there. Okay. Well, and Roy, as it turns out, Chip Roy, is not alone, although he certainly could be. Anyway, as Punchbowl News reports, some House Republicans have significant concerns about whether Johnson, the least experienced speaker in 140 years, and not just because he's only been in a job for 3 months, but because he also had no leadership experience before that, is in over his head. This was the Punchbowl report that Joan pointed out yesterday, I think. And at least one Republican claimed Johnson is, quote, getting rolled even more than, brackets, ousted former Speaker Kevin, unbracket, McCarthy did. Getting rolled even more than McCarthy did. And McCarthy got rolled about everything. Even when he wasn't even Speaker, he was just famous for being rolled. Like I keep pointing out, that, his most infamous comments about, I swear to God, Trump is being paid by Putin was him being rolled or rolling himself out of a conversation, a very serious conversation about the necessity of supporting Ukraine in its ongoing, even then, in 2016, war against Russia. That used to be the position of the Republican Party. Though, interestingly, Kathy McRogers-McBean was the one in that conversation who pointed out, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing in this. We're actually failing in this. We keep thinking we're doing the right thing and succeeding. And doing the right thing and succeeding at that point in 2016 for Republicans meant supporting Ukraine against Russia. And McRogers-McBean was the one who pointed out we're not doing it. And they weren't even entirely beholden to Trump yet. They still were already falling down on the job. Meanwhile, a serious analysis of what's going on in Europe and a serious analysis about what the United States ought to be doing about it is interrupted by Kevin McCarthy going, "Durr, derpy, durr," giving away the game. whatever, but switching the subject in order to inject into the conversation, I swear to God, I believe Putin's paying Trump, and then I'm going to become speaker and then lick his boots while he's on the take from Putin. And then how did I lose my job? What a weird thing. Anyway, conservative dissatisfaction with Johnson stems from what some see as his acquiescence to President Biden and House Democrats on spending, which is a weird perspective to have, but nonetheless, the New Republic reports they have it. Johnson over the weekend agreed to a $1.59 trillion spending deal for 2004. And if I'm not mistaken, I saw somebody pointing out on social media somewhere that how odd it was that he was agreeing to a $1.59 trillion spending deal, given that the deal that resulted in McCarthy's ouster was a $1.59 trillion spending deal. I don't know that that's actually the case, but it sure would be funny. Under this deal, the one that actually exists this time, except might not be ratified, fiscal spending will be limited to what was mostly laid out in June's Fiscal Responsibility Act, which averted a government shutdown at the time, but also angered the Freedom Caucus and in part led to McCarthy's ouster. In the green but hardline Johnson, Republicans like Roy saw, anyway, a figure more amenable to their brand of austerity and obstructionism. Facing his first real test, however, and that's the important part, this is his first the first hard thing he's had to do as Speaker. He's only been there 3 months. But facing his first real test, Johnson seems to have failed in the eyes of some of his colleagues. He mistakenly thought his job was to keep the government running. Oh well. He misunderstood, I guess. Now, concerns over Johnson's ability to lead are trickling out via anonymous quotes from, quote, very well-connected, unquote, House members. Johnson's rise from little-known Louisiana congressman to Speaker of the House in the 23 days following McCarthy's removal was seen as a win for the party's right wing. Johnson's 2020 election denial and social conservatism. He opposes abortion rights and same-sex marriage and sees his election as divinely ordained. That is sort of socially conservative, to say the least. Allowed anti-McCarthy holdouts to coalesce around his candidacy. I think fatigue did about as much for him as that. But at any rate, but the one member threshold for vacating a House Speaker, which McCarthy implemented and which led to his own ousting, is still in place. And now it seems Johnson's days as Speaker may be numbered. All right, well, I guess everyone should have guessed that allowing any member to bring up a privileged motion to vacate the chair without any support, if it comes with no support, it's not going to do anything. It's not really... it's not good for stability and being able to control what's going on the House floor. But ultimately, it's not that one member alone can say, hey, I don't like him, and then he's out. It's that one member can say we should have a vote on it, and they barely have a majority, and a significant portion of their bare majority are mentally not functioning at all. So, and they're chaos agents, and they love chaos. And they think, I don't know, I could end up being Speaker, or one of my friends could end up being Speaker, and then he could send me, I guess, gold bars or something like that, because I heard that's a thing now, and maybe that's what they're interested in. It's difficult to tell. All right, let's see. Other directions worth discussing. Wow, there's an awful lot. Oh, the New York Times... apparently they're very big into reporting stuff these days, and they think about things, and even though everybody is upset with them, they occasionally do, they turn stories that we all know into story visualization. Sometimes we don't know the story, I guess. They seem to be specializing in that. But they've put together a very interesting visual timeline of Trump's pattern of pressure to overturn the 2020 election. Now, it's a worthy service here, done in this case by Lazaro Gamio and Karen Yorish, who have put this thing together, and it's visual and therefore impactful in a new and interesting way. But it is, of course, a compilation of stories that we know or ought to have known, but sometimes, I don't know, fail to consider the collective weight of all these things. And I guess this is meant to counteract the question. I guess this weighs in or becomes particularly timely because of the 14th Amendment question. And is he really an insurrectionist? And how much did he really do to try and overturn the election? And I guess if you only have a partial picture of it, you might not think about things the same way. And maybe this effort to compile the number of things, the extraordinary things that Trump did to try and get people to abandon the correct position that Biden had, in fact, won the election. And, this is something we knew going into it, even then at the time in November, December, January of 2020 and 21, that it wasn't even close, and Trump will have to convince 7, 8 states to reverse themselves completely right in the face of everybody knowing that the truth was the opposite of what Republicans were saying. And even then, it would be highly questionable. And yet, he still tried to do it anyway, which I guess is the real surprising part here. All right, let's see. When you open up the article, there's a scroll starting with November 20th, and then running through January of the various things and the dates that he did them. Let me try and restart this so I can get it for you here. November 20th, raised false claims to Michigan legislators. The 22nd, asked Arizona legislator to replace electors. This is too fast. But they scroll all the way through December and into January. And then they try another thing, putting it on a timeline here. What is this chart? I don't know if I even... okay. A timeline / chart beginning in Michigan. If you scroll over it, will you tell you what the things are? No. All right. But November 20th, there was in Michigan, he approaches people, then Arizona, and it's separated among the 4 states, and then a 5th category, the Justice Department, pressuring people in the Justice Department to do various things. And then a 6th point, the pressuring directly of Mike Pence is the 6th item on this list. Donald J. Trump pressured state and federal government officials to overturn results of the 2020 election in more than 30 phone calls or meetings, according to the Times' analysis of the indictments related to those efforts. Each dot on the chart that's shown here is a phone call or a meeting. There was 1 in Michigan, 3 in Arizona, 1, 2, 3, 4 in Pennsylvania, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in Georgia. And the famous one that we know about is the one in Georgia, the one to Raffensperger. But there were 6 such calls. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 such efforts to pressure people in the Justice Department. And, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to count this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on Mike Pence alone. So that's kind of interesting. The Times compiled every conversation between Mr. Trump and at least one other government official cited in the indictments, I guess not counting ranting to himself. Most of the officials repeatedly rejected his requests, but Trump kept asking. That's important too. He began, prosecutors said, by trying to convince Gop officials in swing states won by Joe Biden that the fraud was so rampant that they needed to substitute Biden's electors with slates that would support him. And he did this in Michigan, where he's claiming that there were ballots being dumped in to the count for Biden, the claims of illegal voting of some kind in Arizona, the claim that there were more votes counted than voters in existence in Pennsylvania, all of which was disproven, and then ballot stuffing in Georgia, right, in the Fulton County claims as well. None of which turned out to actually be true, but he wanted state officials to take action as if it were. Days before Michigan was set to certify Mr. Biden's victory, Trump summoned the leaders of the Michigan state legislature to the White House. That was a November 20th meeting in which Trump raised false claims about fraudulent votes in Detroit. The state Senate majority leader refuted Trump's claims, and then after the meeting, the leaders in a joint statement said, "We have not yet been made aware of any information that would change the outcome of the election." Well, right, because it didn't exist. Then some compilation about what happened in Arizona, just to give you more flavor of how this went before we take our break. A call on November 22nd, just 2 days later, having been rebuffed by the people in Michigan, he turns to Arizona and falsely asserts that that substantial numbers of non-citizens, non-residents, and dead people had voted fraudulently. The officials there asked for evidence, and they were told it would be provided later. We don't have it yet, but we'll provide it later. Well, it never was, because it never existed. And then Trump asked Rusty Bowers, the Republican House Speaker in Arizona, to replace Biden's electors. Bowers refused because, of course, there was no basis. And then he calls him again around Christmas to try to pressure him again.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm going to continue to take a look through this New York Times sort of visual representation of the many, many items and the many instances in which Trump tried pressuring state and federal officials to change the outcome of the election, essentially. This one is interesting just because we left off in the middle of considering Arizona and the pressure that Trump placed on Rusty Bowers, the Speaker of the House in the state legislature in Arizona. And this is an interesting, I'd love to see more context in this one. And I'm sure we had it at some point and read through the story, but something to go back and look at. Just the nature of this quote here from Bowers, that in November 22nd, 2 days after trying to pressure Michigan into doing this and being rebuffed, he turns to Arizona and gets rebuffed there, but then heads back to Arizona a month later, Christmas, and says something to Bowers, to which Bowers responds, "I voted for you." This is the quote. "I voted for you. I worked for you. I campaigned for you. I just won't do anything illegal for you," which is important to know because occasionally I get challenged in all this and say, well, show me the quote where Trump says, "I want you to do this crime for me." And I'm sure that he never says, "This is illegal and I want you to do it." I'm sure he says, "I want you to do this thing." And Bowers says, "Well, I'm not going to do anything illegal for you." I'm curious about whether the response is, "Well, it's not illegal what I'm asking you to do. I'm just asking you to do this. You think you might think it's illegal, but it isn't. And here's why." I don't know if he ever explains himself, but I'd be curious to know, because some of the other things that I know about, and the stories we've heard told, I guess it all turns on whether or not you think it's an effective strategy to say, wink, wink, I'm not ordering you to do anything illegal. I'm just saying you should do this thing, which, is it illegal? Who even knows? Well, therefore, I never told him to do anything illegal. Well, you did. You told him to do something that was illegal. You just pretended that you didn't know it was illegal. I don't know. We'll see. But in the meantime, I want to continue on through the timeline here, just so I guess it's good to do something comprehensive like this in case there's anything new that you might have missed in your first reading of all the indictments against him, etc. But they're happening in so many places and so many courts, it's possible we may have missed some things. But here on a timeline, next up is a December 5th call to Brian Kemp in Georgia. In early December, Trump calls Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, and the former Secretary of State there, of course, remember that, and the state's Attorney General, Chris Carr, according to the indictments. Now, we all know about his calls to Brad Raffensperger later on, the Secretary of State, but just in case you weren't aware or had forgotten along the way, since that was such a spectacularly bad call, he first calls the governor and says, I want you to do something. Trump asked Kemp to convene a special session of the legislature to overturn the state's election results on December 5th. And then the next 3 days later, on December 8th, calls the Attorney General there, Carr, and asks Carr to support a lawsuit that sought to decertify the electors in Georgia. Carr said state officials had already investigated various claims and had seen no evidence to support them, which I guess he was supposed to, Trump was supposed to take to mean, no, I won't help you. That's what it did mean, but that's probably not how Trump took it. Then, he later changed his focus to Brad Raffensperger, Georgia's Secretary of State, and Raffensperger's chief investigator who was investigating ballot signatures. So first, a call with the chief investigator on December 23rd. Trump claimed he won Georgia by hundreds of thousands of votes and said, when the right answer comes out, you'll be praised. And then he tells Raffensperger a week or so later on January 2nd that he needs Raffensperger to help him, quote, find, I always did find that rather amazingly incriminating, find 11,780 votes. He repeated a litany of falsehoods, including that 5,000 dead people had voted, and is told, of course, the data you have is wrong. The actual numbers were two dead people who voted. Now, they move in this visualization to the concentration on the Justice Department. As his efforts with state officials floundered, Trump tried to persuade Justice Department officials to open sham election crime investigations and influence state legislatures with knowingly false claims of election fraud, according to the prosecutors. You see how that fits in? I'm going to try and get the state actors to exercise their alleged powers to undo things. They all said no because there was no evidence. Well, what about if the U.S. Department of Justice, a trustworthy source of such information, told you that it was their belief that there was things wrong, of various sorts, that they had to either, well, I guess he still wasn't asking them to say they discovered fraud, but simply to declare there to have been fraud. And would that be cover enough for the state actors to do what he wanted them to do? Or if it was too late for the states to act, could he simply preempt everything at the federal level and say, the Justice Department says, hold on. I know it's unprecedented. I know there's no mechanism for dealing with this, but the United States Department of Justice, an impartial actor over which I have no influence because of the separation between the office of the presidency and the Justice Department, which separation I seek to erase, both right now and in any future term that I may hold, are independently saying that there's reason to put the brakes on here. All his efforts with the state officials floundered. Trump tries pressuring the Justice Department to open sham elections. And remember, I think this is the context in which they say, well, but there's no evidence. We're not going to do that. That would be election interference. If we just declare that there's fraud when there's no evidence of fraud, why would we do that? And he says, oh, evidence of fraud. Well, don't worry about it. You just say that there's something wrong with the elections and just leave it to me and the Republicans in Congress to do the rest. We'll come up with the BS that's supposed to stand in as proof here. Next up, reported here, this is the rundown of how things went with the Justice Department. A conversation with Attorney General Barr on December 1st, 2020. Trump said there was fraud in Detroit. Barr said, nope, no indication of fraud in Detroit or anywhere else for that matter. the description of the overall action on this page here. Trump did so with several high-ranking justice officials, including Attorney General Bill Barr, Jeffrey Rosen, the acting Attorney General, who replaced Barr when he finally resigned, and Richard P. Donahue, the Deputy Acting Attorney General. On that call with Rosen and Donahue on December 27th, about a month after hearing from Barr that there was no fraud in Detroit, Trump raised multiple fraud claims. Donahue said the department would not change the outcome of the election. And then Trump answers him with, quote, "Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman," Trump responded. "We'll do the criming." After that, as January 6th neared, Trump became determined to persuade Pence to block congressional certification of Biden's victory. He conveyed this message in at least 9 phone calls and meetings between December 25th, Merry Christmas, and the morning of January 6th. On December 25th, let's see, Trump allegedly turned a Christmas call, Merry Christmas, he's actually calling for that, into a conversation about overturning the election and berating Mr. Pence for being, quote, "too honest" on New Year's Day when he calls him again, "Merry Christmas, I want you to do me a favor." Merry Christmas to you too, but no, I'm not doing that. "Well, I'll call you again. Happy New Year as well." "Hey, Happy New Year, Mike. You're still a jerk. Do this anyway. You're too honest. That's your problem. My New Year's resolution is myself to be less honest. You should do it too." So on Christmas, Trump asks Pence to reject Biden's electoral votes, and Pence says, and we don't know whether he means, I don't think I have the authority to change the outcome. Or does he mean, I don't think I have the authority to change the outcome. Depends who you ask, I guess. And then the New Year's call, Trump berated Pence for opposing a lawsuit that sought to give him authority to reject votes. That's interesting. I don't think I have the authority. All right, well, we'll sue to give you the authority. Well, I actually opposed that lawsuit. Well, I'm berating you for opposing it. And Pence said there was no constitutional basis for such authority, to which Trump tells him, "You're too honest." Then Trump grew more and more frustrated with the vice president, met with him on January 5th, and asked Pence to decertify the results. Pence refused. Trump said Pence was doing a great disservice. And then on the morning of January 6th, again, Trump asks Pence to disrupt the joint session of Congress. Pence refuses, and Trump says Pence would, quote, "go down as a wimp." Oh, no. Worst possible outcome. Lastly, I guess, less than an hour after his call with the vice president, Trump rallied supporters from a stage near the White House. Soon after, a mob of Trump loyalists stormed and occupied the Capitol, bringing the final electoral count to a halt until order was restored in the building. Hours later, Congress reconvened. Pence declared Biden the official winner at 3:41 a.m. the next day. No mention of the gallows for some strange reason. But I guess that's not mentioned in any of the conversations that they logged. But, an interesting and valuable rundown of the events. I think maybe most useful in this scrolling, running timeline in chronological order, but running too quickly for me to be able to read it all off to you. And I read it off to you the way they arranged it by states and targets. But anyway, the timeline will help you. It's just running too fast for me to be able to do it. And I'm not going to reload it 18 times just to give it to you in chronological order. But anyway, you should be aware that that compilation is out there and is useful. All right, let's see. Other things to share with you in the closing segment here. Boy, there's a lot. I'm trying to decide which ones to go with. Let me add this. Something that Scott sent my way, just by way of, I guess, giving kudos to Rosalyn MacGregor, who keeps us up to date all the time with developments in Michigan. And when national news figures discover what's going on in Michigan and make a big deal out of it, it's rightly so, we thank them for doing so and smile and wink and nod to our fellow KITM listeners who feel like they've known it all since forever. Another such instance here reported by Raw Story, the raw story of Rachel Maddow
mocking the Michigan Republican Party. I guess she spent some time on her show recently talking about that and the way Raw Story wrote it up here. And do I have this right? ML Nestil is the author of the Raw Story piece. I'm viewing it over MSN's network here, but it's credited to Raw Story. Will the real Republican Party in Michigan please stand up? It says. You tell me, MSNBC's Rachel Maddow teased on Monday night. Is there a Republican Party in the swing state of Michigan? Is there one? Is there one? Are there two? How do you tell the difference? Well, the query echoed Bridge, Michigan reporter Jonathan Oosting on Twitter, posting, "It's the tale of two Republican parties in Michigan." The MichiganGOP.org faction saying Christina Caramo is still chair despite an illegitimate meeting that took place, I guess the real state committee meeting on January 13th, and or will take place on January 13th, whereas Michigan-GOP.org, there's MIGOP.org faction and the MI-GOP.org faction, and they say that Melinda Pago is now the chair of the Michigan Republican Party, and that Caramo was ousted during a closed door meeting, and that the January 13th meeting that Caramo says is the real meeting has been canceled. Well, that's going to be difficult to reconcile, don't you think? If you put a dash between the MI and the GOP at mi-gop.org, you'll find yourself at a totally different Michigan Republican Party website, one where the chair is not Christina Caramo, but rather this other person, a totally different person. Whatever the dueling.org's undisputed is that on Saturday, a whopping 89% of Michigan Republicans voted to remove election denier and state Republican chairwoman Christina Caramo, ending calls for her resignation by many in the party, which has been inundated by financial woes and infighting. In fact, as of December, the party was, quote, on the brink of bankruptcy. The meeting wasn't attended by Caramo. Enter Maddow, who, like Oosting, was puzzled by the dueling Gops. Each of these totally different websites with totally different chairs says literally, paid for by the Michigan Republican Party. But they appear to be two different, unrelated things with two different people in charge. Maybe one of them was generated by AI. Maybe both of them were generated by AI. The MIGOP.org features a ticker on top that reads, quote, a small fringe faction of state committee members staged an illegitimate gathering to claim removal of chairwoman Christina Caramo. It then jumps to a press release calling the meeting a rogue cabal that called today's bogus gathering a preemptive ploy to illegally remove the chair and many other state committee members. And it added, this entire process is illegitimate according to the rules of the Michigan Republican Party bylaws, and it is illegal based on Michigan election laws. How do you like that? It also included a video of the general counsel facing the camera saying, hi, my name is Dan Hartman. I am still the general counsel for the Michigan Republican Party. The rival site, mi-gop.org, features a static page with a picture of interim chair Melinda Lego? This time says Lego. I thought it was Pago before, but I don't know. With stars and stripes in the background. It discussed the process to, quote, remove former chairwoman Christina Caramo and former general counsel Hartman. It ended with a turn to the future. Now is the time to unify Republicans and grow our voter base to win elections throughout our state in 2024 and beyond. All right, well, good luck with that. That's fun fracturing of reality. I don't know if I had heard about this coup, but I guess Republicans do coups all the time, and you should get used to it, and I guess it makes it that much easier to understand why everyone regards Donald Trump as having staged one as well. And I guess they figure, he's not in prison yet, we should stage our own coup as well, although it didn't involve, as far as we know, as much violence or the occupation of the state capitol or the state Republican committee headquarters either. So
All right, very interesting. Just to stay up to date on what's happening in Michigan, or maybe not Michigan, maybe it's Michigan, maybe it's a different name for a state now, but I think they were trying to hold on to that same title. Anyway, that should be pretty interesting. We'll check in on that. I do have another recorded piece from Rosalyn at the moment, but I don't believe it has anything to do with that story, but I can't believe she'll let that one lie for very long either. All right, other stories of some interest. We started on this one the other day, and there's more on it. And let's see. Where's the piece that we had the other day? I was reading, yes, this one was Philip Bump writing about the high cost of DeSantis's presidential bid, ? What was the high cost? Vaccine misinformation, something we referred to earlier. How many people, did we do it on the air or did we do it during the break? How many people had to contract long COVID and or die in order for Ron DeSantis to establish what he thought were going to be the bona fides that were going to make him the Republican nominee for president this time around, except instead he was a national joke and he's not even coming in second anymore. Philip Bump wrote this back mid last week, January 4th. We started to read the beginning of it. Let's run through it and then see how many of these other similar articles we can't get through, just to drive the point home. Joseph Ladapo, the top public health official in Florida, will not be persuaded that the vaccines created to combat coronavirus are safe. When he hyped the idea that the vaccines were dangerous in October of 2022, independent experts, at times gently, but often not, pointed out that his arguments were baseless and misinformed. But Ladapo was unabashed. He appeared a few weeks later on a podcast that had elevated the QAnon conspiracy theory to argue his position and attack COVID-19 responses more broadly, including saying a mask mandate was a, quote, manipulative, destructive, divisive policy that was implemented for the purpose of control and maintaining control, which of course is interesting given the role he played in Ron DeSantis' attempt to control and maintain control. He never gained any control to maintain by killing people through COVID misinformation, but something they could rally about while they were dying, I guess. This wasn't new. In March 2022, 6 months into his tenure, he blasted officials in charge of the response, demanding that Floridians, quote, not let these people get away with it. On Wednesday, just recently, that is, I guess last week, Ladapo went further in his efforts to kneecap vaccine adoption. Dangerous time to be doing it, of course. His office released a statement announcing that he was calling for vaccines using mRNA technology, like those from Pfizer and Moderna, to be curtailed, citing a debunked concern about the effects on recipients' DNA. Again, a large body of research indicates that these vaccines are safe and have been important in reducing the COVID-19 death toll. The analysis completed by KFF, and is that the Kaiser Family Foundation, I think, in early 2022, estimated that the 234,000 of the deaths from COVID to that point might have been prevented had the deceased been vaccinated. Thousands of people are still dying from COVID-19 each month, but the ratio between infections and deaths had plummeted since vaccines became widely available, in part because of changes to the dominant strains that are circulating. By contrast, there is no evidence that the vaccines pose a significant widespread danger. In another state, having a top health official offer recommendations at odds with the broader medical community and framing those recommendations in the context of a dispute rooted in politics might trigger a reconsideration of the official's position. But this is Florida, domain of Governor Ron DeSantis, who appointed Ladapo and who has made a concerted effort to be the face of rejecting expert consensus on COVID-19 responses. Why? In part, clearly, because he wanted to be the Republican nominee for president. Polling from KFF, published in November, reinforces the extent to which uptake of coronavirus vaccines is linked to partisanship, and that has been the case for a long time.
KFF data in November of 21 showed that the main divide in getting vaccinated was rooted in partisanship. While half of Americans said late last year they would get or had gotten the newest iteration of vaccines, only a quarter of Republicans indicated their intent to do so. Among Democrats, 3/4 said they would or had. The path to this point has been well documented, but it's worth reiterating. When the first confirmed case of coronavirus arrived in the U.S. in 2020, Trump was eager to dismiss it as a non-issue. That soon became indefensible. So Trump and state governors, including DeSantis, endorsed efforts to limit the spread of the disease. But Trump, facing voters that November, was worried about the effect on the economy from mitigation measures, so he began undermining medical experts, insisting once again that the country was ready to move past the pandemic. He spent the last months of his presidency focused heavily on rejecting his loss, but carved out some time to promote the vaccines that his administration had helped ensure were developed quickly. That could have been something that he spent more time on, but most of the rollout of those vaccines fell to his successor, President Biden, meaning that government-backed promotion of vaccination got a new Democratic veneer. Overlay the skepticism of authority that Trump had promoted, and vaccines, like others' efforts to combat the virus, were tainted among Republicans by partisan perceptions. Fewer Republicans got the vaccines. More Republicans died of COVID-19, as measured directly in Florida. Data compiled by the Washington Post shows how the gap in deaths relative to population rose more quickly in counties that backed Trump in 2020 than in ones that had backed Biden, particularly in Florida, and particularly after vaccines became widely available in 2021. Then this ridiculous and frightening chart showing the number of deaths per 10,000 county residents in Florida and the U.S. as a whole, where they're Trump voter versus Biden voting, both in Florida and the U.S., the number of deaths per 10,000 residents in those counties much lower when it was Biden voting, and Florida Trump voting counties, the highest of all, somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 deaths per 10,000 residents, whereas, say, in Florida, Biden voting counties tended to have about 35 to perhaps 36 deaths per 10,000. And in the U.S. overall, about 30 deaths per 10,000 in Biden voting counties across America. That all through 2023 at this point. DeSantis rose to national attention by promoting his state as a destination for those uninterested in being made or even encouraged to take steps to address the pandemic. That is almost certainly why DeSantis tapped Ladapo to lead the state's health efforts. In a statement from DeSantis' office announcing the nomination, Ladapo offered praise for the governor. Quote, "I have been impressed by Governor DeSantis' leadership and determination to ensure that Floridians are afforded all opportunities to maintain their health and wellness while preserving their freedoms as Americans." And yet they died in greater numbers overall. By far. DeSantis' successful effort to position himself as the face of opposition to COVID-19 measures, including his slower evolution in opposition to vaccination efforts, ended up not helping him very much in his presidential bid. Republicans in particular were quick to dismiss the pandemic as an issue at all, meaning that among Republicans in particular, the saliency of DeSantis' COVID-19 response fell dramatically. He did all these things and they didn't even really care. Plus, they were deadly. His efforts to cast Trump as overly rigid on COVID-19 haven't gained much traction, in part because Trump's embrace of containment measures didn't last much longer than Ladapo's. The governor's political team, though, is trying to wring some benefit from his COVID-19 position. In response to Ladapo's announcement this week, longtime DeSantis aide Christina Pushaw, remember her? Now working for his campaign, of course, praised Ladapo's scientific integrity as she celebrated living in a state where Big Pharma does not dictate health policy recommendations. But everybody's dead, so it doesn't matter. One can imagine a different trajectory, both broadly and in Florida, one in which Trump didn't make his battle with medical elites, as he might put it, a part of his reelection efforts, one in which this didn't create a marketplace for DeSantis to position himself as an anti-mitigation politician whose positioning led America's third largest state to have its public health efforts run by a guy who actively fights against coronavirus vaccines. It is by no means a stretch to assume that some Floridians decided against getting vaccinated against coronavirus thanks to the presentations of Ladapo or DeSantis himself before succumbing to COVID-19. The question instead is how many might have done so, deaths that followed from, at least in part, from DeSantis' struggle to come in second in the Republican 2024 presidential nomination fight. In other words, I guess that, I don't know, I feel like that didn't come out quite right at the end there. I may have done a disservice here, but basically asking the question, did DeSantis make a conscious decision to risk the lives and, in fact, the deaths of thousands of Floridians in order to make himself look like some sort of resistance hero, only to lose by a whole hell of a lot anyway, and maybe not even come in second, not even that distant second that he was striving for before, now a distant third to Nikki Haley. Think about all the people who sacrificed their lives to make that not even happen. I think that's pretty amazing and pretty worrisome. And, there's been follow-up in that regard. There are another 2 or 3 such articles trying to point this out. And, doing a pretty good job of it, too. It's in the LA Times, a column that says, "Meet the most dangerous quack in America." And along similar lines, taking Trump to task again as well. Apparently, he has mused recently that maybe COVID-19 was punishment for his tariffs on China, that they had released it intentionally. Back to that excuse. Well, maybe we'll shoehorn that in on Thursday and or Friday, because it's time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming up next here on Netroots Radio.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
He starts off with a good point here. Trump's immunity appeal was shattered not just by any old judge, but a judge that Trump doesn't even believe should be a citizen of the United States. Why, it's all rigged against him once again, as his own personal desires don't hold sway in America anymore. What the hell's going on with that? Stay tuned for that and more next.